Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on looking at how real-time data can improve government services. I'm Siobhan Benita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, a publishing house that serves civil servants in the UK and all around the world, and with our knowledge partner today, CTS. With regard to today's topic, governments are collecting increasingly large amounts of data, with information flowing into departments from all different directions. And a lot of that information contains great insights that can help to influence and shape policy to make policy delivery better for the citizens. But those insights can be lost if that analysis takes too long to unlock the information that's in that data. So for the data to be most meaningful and actionable, it needs to be provided in real time so that policymakers can make decisions based on understanding the situation as it is now, not as it was, and to help ensure that policies can really keep track with changing circumstances. We have an absolutely fantastic panel with us here today who are going to talk about some of those issues, looking at how data is being used in government at the moment, what some of the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and what are some of the lessons learned from the things that are already being trialled. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our fantastic speakers. There's also an opportunity today for you to put your questions to that panel and really do make the most of this opportunity. So whichever device you are using, there should be a Q&A function. From this point on, at any time during the webinar, please use that Q&A function to message in your questions. And once we've heard from our panelists, we'll get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of the webinar. But now let me introduce our brilliant speakers today. So first we'll hear from Alison King. Alison leads the public sector practice at Google Cloud Partners CTS. Drawing on her 26 years experience in the IT sector, Alison works with central government organisations to embrace Google technology to ensure that they have platforms in place to deliver innovations that can shape policy to improve citizens' lives. Then we'll hear from Sue Bateman, who is the Interim Chief Data Officer at the Central Digital and Data Office. Sue's work supports public sector organisations to make greater use of emerging technologies to improve public services and policy making. This includes responsibility for the Data Standards Authority and initiatives to promote ethical use of data, data sharing, open data, and data capability. And we'll hear from Fiona James, who is Director of Data Growth and Operations and Chief Data Officer at the Office for National Statistics. Fiona is an experienced digital, data, technology and policy expert with a deep understanding of the delivery challenges faced by public sector organisations. She's worked in numerous government departments, including Transport, Cabinet Office and the Crown Prosecution Service. Great that Fiona could be with us here today because she's got a really tight schedule. So unfortunately, she's going to have to leave us at 3 o'clock, but it would be wonderful to hear her thoughts before she has to go. Then we'll hear from Talia Baldwin, who is the Director of the Geospatial Commission at the Cabinet Office, which is tasked with advising the government on priorities for improving the UK's location data and developing and overseeing implementation of the UK's national geospatial strategy. Prior to this, Talia established and led HM Treasury's digital policy team, where she was responsible for the approach to public spending on digital technology and infrastructure. And then last, but by no means least, we'll hear from Jean-François, or JF Perez, who is UK and Ireland Business Development Director at Public Sector Google Cloud. JF has over 28 years of experience working with organisations right across the public sector and has led key change initiatives in procurement, supply chain, business intelligence and manufacturing systems. He was responsible for the technical delivery of the Government Gateway and created the blueprint for Government as a Platform and Gov Verify. So you will agree with me that we really do have a fantastic expert panel here today. As I said, send in your questions and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the webinar. But now, without further ado, I'm going to invite Alison to kick us off with some opening remarks. Over to you, Alison.
Lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us, everybody. It's great to see so many people here. A little bit about CTS. CTS, or Cloud Technology Solutions. We are a Google Premier partner. We are Google Public Sector Partner of the Year last year for the whole of EMEA. We are a growing company. We've doubled in size in the last couple of years, really. We're 270 staff strong now. Offices in London, Manchester, Edinburgh and Utrecht in Netherlands. And about of that 270 staff, there is 180 Google certified engineering resource, which is UK based, and many of those are SE cleared. So we are Google only, so we don't play with those other guys, AWS and Microsoft. So you could call us a Google Centre of Excellence, or to give away our Northern heritage, that strapline, Google done right. So next slide, please, Raquel. So there's nothing new about data or gaining insights from data. In recent years, we've helped a lot of organisations modernise applications that depend on data. And in doing that, they've gained a lot of cost savings and operational benefit. One of the example of that is Department for Transport, where we helped modernise Lennon, which is an application which records ticket sales from franchises in the train network. It was quite constrained by its on-premise environment, so we migrated that to the cloud and brought about insights that could be gained simultaneously and much, much quicker than was done before. But where next for data? Where next for government with data? So IDC state that just in a few years' time that about a quarter of all the data in the data sphere will be real-time in nature. So what's the opportunity for government departments there? And when should that be used or accessed? So digital devices, anybody that's driven down the motorway at any time following Google Maps, that gets the little red line coming up ahead and sees a series of cars take the sharp exits off the slip road, will understand how that feels. That feels pretty good. You feel informed. There's a lot of value to that, for you personally. So presenting timely information to the right people at the right time is really powerful. Digital commerce is probably less easy to see how that would benefit a government department as it would too for retail, for example. But the ONS have started to certainly maybe not gain real time, but certainly more granular and more timely information regarding inflation and how better to protect those vulnerable people that may be impacted by inflation a little more harshly than was first thought. And they're doing that with point of sale data, web scraping and faster indicators, like I say, more timely, more granular to understand the intricacies of that. Digital communications, there was a brief paper that you may have read where the Cabinet Office tackled misinformation as its source on vaccines during the COVID pandemic. And that helped protect an entire population in the face of a very turbulent and changeable time. And finally, digital media consumption. There is a phenomenon of video streaming, which has produced a churn and return culture. So what's in today and what's in tomorrow is not necessarily easy to understand. So how do government departments communicate with the right people at the right time? An example of that was ONS, again, during the 2021 census, saw a five-fold increase in census returns when there was a mention on Gogglebox of all the shows. But yeah, that just goes to show. So next slide, please, Raquel. So historically, the value of data has been gleaned over an aggregate of single events. And the more events that are built over time, the more value there is in the data. And this has tended to inform strategy, see trends and patterns in the data and so on. But real time now tends to focus more on either a single event or a critical point in time, or or an individual person or a group of individuals. But governments don't necessarily always have the need for real time. And it doesn't much matter what the definition of real-time data or real-time analysis is. But speed of analytics and speed of action are key to enhancing the value of data-driven public services. So machine learning, for example, can support a decision-making process or mediate one. And Jean-Francois will talk about an example of that in healthcare a little later on. But for now, I'll hand over to Sue and pass the baton on, and away you go.
Thanks so much, Alison. I mean, a really great way to start there, because I think you've set the scene for the rest of the conversation. Interesting to hear how CTS is working with different departments, some of those examples you gave, the DFT one, but also it'd be interesting to hear how Fiona comes back on what you said about some of the ONS examples and the way that maybe they're looking at data, but also stressing they're not necessarily always about real-time data or like different types of data, but speed is key. So getting those insights data really important for policy making. Thank you so much. Over we go to Sue.
Brilliant. Hi everybody. So I'm Sue Bateman, as Siobhan introduced me, and I think you kind of covered the breadth of things that I do, and there are some really great things that as part of my role I can get involved with, and one of them, which is in its second year of running, is the Civil Service Data Challenge. And I thought that might be a different way in at kind of framing the usual things that I will say around what we're trying to do centrally from a strategic perspective, and kind of bring it back to the opportunities around improving public services. Really, it's in the gift of everybody. It's not just in the gift of the data experts. You know, clearly that is an important component, but there is a wealth of untapped ideas that are coming through this year's Civil Service Data Challenge and through last year's, and showing that individuals and teams are spotting that connection between different types of data and their applicability to different challenges. So some of the things that we're kind of seeing this year, and some similar themes last year, things like combating fraud, using virtual reality in policy experiments, thinking about how we might use data from different sources to tackle really serious issues around modern slavery, around net zero and energy efficiency, how we support, and this is kind of really topical with the initiative around people coming from Ukraine, but previously from Afghanistan. Where have we got stocks in government accommodation and in private sector accommodation that we need to know real time what accommodation is there and available for people, and also, you know, some of the ideas are kind of demonstrating that there's more nuance and knowledge about the different kinds of data that could be used. It isn't just let's get a data set from DWP and HMRC in a local authority. They're thinking about satellite imagery around geospatial information, some of them referencing real-time information, where, as Alison's just said, it's not necessarily real-time, but it is about that awareness around increased speed. And so that's really heartening for me that we've got loads of ideas. And so the question for me then is how do we support that, and how do I support that with my team in CDDO? And you know, we are seeing some of that translating into the system starting to kind of adopt different practices. So one of the great examples that we like to talk about is an API that DWP have made available, so that in pharmacies, when they get somebody coming along with a prescription, they can do a quick check on eligibility, and that's saving both DWP and importantly the NHS money on making sure that people who are eligible are getting it and people who aren't. And similarly, with the recent period of mourning, because there was a bank holiday, and that put some of the services kind of out of sync. And there's a great example of where loads of organisations that mobilise, but particularly where lots of people would be in receipt of benefits on a Monday, and that was identified through the data, through the system that was available, to make sure that those people got payment early and didn't have to kind of wait until after the state funeral. So that's kind of, you know, you can see those pockets of innovation, of where organizations are starting to recognize the value of data, recognize it in the context of digital transformation. But then the question is, how do we make that the norm? Because it still feels like there's a, you know, we've got some way to go to get to that reality. We've got the national data strategy now that's been almost 2 years in kind of operation, and we're making great progress against the 30 or so commitments that we set out from a government perspective. I think we've delivered on 11, we've got another 14 or 15 on track, and some of them, the remainder have just morphed into something else, because we, in the course of kind of a 2-year period with something as fast moving as digital and data, you realise that maybe the activity that you put in a strategy is no longer quite fit for purpose. And in June this year, to kind of demonstrate that evolution from the national data strategy, we've published a DDAT strategy, so a roadmap around transforming for a digital future. Data is really at the heart of that, and our vision, actually not dissimilar from some of the stuff that Alison you've presented, is around recognising the need that if we're going to really make good use of data, we need to make that discoverable and available, and importantly then usable by organisations. So our vision for a data marketplace by 2025 is really us putting another stake in the ground in our journey around how we help to transform our services, and how we underpin work like the 75 great services, which is also featured in the strategy. And I can come on maybe later in discussion about some of the things that we're doing, and also recognising some of the challenges that we have, but I'll stop there as well.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sue. I mean, really interesting to hear. You mentioned the Civil Service Data Challenge. If people aren't familiar with that, then they can obviously find details of that, I think, on gov.uk, but also on the Global Government Forum website. There's some really good examples of innovation, and how you're showing how policymakers, not just data experts, are starting to understand across a range of policy areas how data can be really useful for them in improving public services. And then that looking ahead is, how do you just make the data more available, accessible and usable for the widest range of policymakers. Thanks so much, Sue. Fiona, you've been mentioned already by a couple of people, so over to you from what's happening in the ONS.
Thanks, Siobhan. So yeah, data is absolutely at the heart of everything we do at the ONS, so that we're a trusted, data-driven organisation for the public good. And we take two approaches to achieve this. Firstly, we use that rapid assessment and new commercial data sources to produce robust official statistics. And secondly, we use new innovative methods to produce quick insights to inform the public priorities and decisions. On the rapid assessment and new data, we seek to understand people's behaviours and attitudes, and that's not something that you can just pull from existing systems in real time, but you do need to talk to people directly. On the cost of living, for example, something that's affecting all of us at the moment, we look not just at the monthly price inflation series, which Alison touched on, but we also look at more frequent assessments on the impact on businesses and households, which feeds into decisions about how to mitigate rising prices. For example, we've recently released new analysis looking at the price of fuel and transactions through aggregated visa data to see how rising prices has impacted on the volume purchased. We also ran a series of surveys on Ukrainian nationals arriving in the UK, considering how they are settling in and integrating into life. That includes talking to the sponsors to understand the intentions for the longer term, as well as what impact the cost of living is having on them. And that informs ministerial discussions on our humanitarian response, published both in English and Ukrainian. And very recently, this week, in fact, our over 50s survey has looked at why we have a high proportion of over 50s leaving or have left the workforce during COVID. And we were able to do this rapidly by returning to respondents who had already taken part in some of our other surveys online. On using innovative methods to produce analysis, I'm sure many of the audience here will be familiar with our data science campus, and they do lots of brilliant work in this area. For example, in August, they visualised rail schedules using open data during the rail strikes. And last April, they kind of undertook some more experimental research, tracking the lowest cost grocery items based on that web scraped supermarket data for 30 everyday grocery items. So really what we find is that there's this kind of trade-off between quality and timeliness, but it's widely recognised that the more timely the information, the more likely a decision maker is able to act on it. And some of the work we do in a timely fashion would certainly be less value if it came out later. So for example, the lowest cost grocery analysis was really complicated and quite controversial, but we did it as fast as possible because we knew that the prices were already rising. And there's also a big difference between a one-off look at something and something that must be consistent over time. Often policymakers would much rather have something rough and ready and something that's a bit perfect much later. So we find with official statistics, they must be comparable over time, come out regularly, and be completely correct. And we have big funding decisions being made from them and other things. Plus, we've got kind of legal commitments that we need to make. So there is a difference. We see a difference in this kind of data. Looking to the longer term, we want to continue to grow the data and the integration of that data and be able to use even more real-time data. So for example, we get close to 100% of the market in covering the weekly point of sale data that Alison mentioned for inflation. And we're also looking to build a new world of kind of population estimates, rethinking the role of censuses altogether to develop a more agile, responsive statistics system that can provide real-time data, which reflects regional variations and gives more insights than the current census is able to. For example, by combining HMRC's pay-as-you-earn data with administrative population and household estimates, we can produce individual household net income estimates at a lower geographical level than the existing surveys can currently provide. And we'll be making a recommendation next year about whether we'll be running another census or not. And importantly, we're also building the strong foundations that we laid during the pandemic to take a more strategic approach in line with the strategy that Sue talked about, the 2025 strategy, by putting in place a new cross-government data platform to enable better access and integration of data through the new integrated data service in collaboration with partners across government and the devolved administrations. And that's going to be giving controlled access to de-identified integrated data products with standards and access to a live catalogue of research-ready data sets, which is going to offer the key kind of functionality that analysts and data scientists are looking for at the frontier of analysis in government. But I think what I want to leave the audience with is that collaboration, transparency and value exchange are absolutely the central tenets to realise those ambitions. we need to pilot kind of new ways of working which help streamline the existing landscape and innovate in the way that we all use and access data. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Fiona. So I know your time was really tight, so thank you so much. Just make sure I'm doing you justice before you have to go. Really interesting to hear what you said about that need for kind of the traditional, robust, timely kind of analysis and statistics that you put out, the stuff that can be comparable over time, but running alongside that, that much more rapid kind of quick fire analysis that can really help politicians in particular who need to make decisions very quickly. There's a place for both of those. And then really good to hear, building on what Sue said, that you have this new integrated data service, so people can certainly go and look at that already. And those key messages you're leaving people with: collaboration, transparency and value exchange. And I think we will definitely in the questions come on to how people are working together more collaboratively, I think, in sharing data in new and innovative ways. Thank you so much, Fiona. Thank you for being with us for part of today's conversation. And now, Talia, I'm coming over to you.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. Yeah, really interesting. Sue and Fiona touched on geospatial data and its relevance a little bit, but I'm just going to take a few minutes to set some context for how government thinks about geospatial policy, and then touch on some programs, work streams that we are doing where geospatial data and real-time data are relevant. So just a bit of context. The Geospatial Commission is an expert committee set up relatively recently. We're cross-cutting, we work with multiple partners, and our main mission is to accelerate high-value location data transformation. So we do this because we have a number of levers we provide. We supply the public sector with core location data, think Ordnance Survey, data, postcode data, for example, and then we set policy and deliver change through particular programs. One of the biggest programs we're delivering is the National Underground Asset Register, where we are providing centralised and digitalised access to underground assets, combining public and private sector data. That's quite interesting in terms of how live that needs to be useful as well. So what's special about location data? Why has the government got an entity that's thinking about it in particular? Well, I think there's an increasing ubiquity in its use and a level of familiarity that's increasing as well in both the public and the private sector about applications. There's therefore a growing awareness of the opportunity to model relative geographic impacts through linked data. You know, if you combine geospatial data with other data, it adds value to your analysis and operational delivery. There's also some interesting considerations about what we can infer about someone's personal life because of the locations they visit. And real-time brings in a live tracking element to that and a personal element if it's not anonymized as well. We might want to touch on that later. So real-time data from a location data perspective adds value to a number of applications. We think about different kinds of geospatial data that are relevant here. So population mobility is a big one. The data that telecoms networks and mobile phone apps have, and this can be used and has been used most recently for national and urgent purposes. Think COVID management and everything that government's done around that, that's relied on access to pretty live location data combined with other data. But there's also more local focused, medium to longer term applications around transport planning, for example. Another kind of data that is relevant from a location data perspective is satellite imaging. So nearer to real time gives a real sense of change. We can see the impact if land is hit by weather incidents, for example. Think of the recent wildfires. Also on a more kind of business as usual basis, near real time compliance with land management. Although at the moment, I think it is more relevant for applications outside of the UK. Think the rainforest changes that are happening and being tracked. And then you've got future applications for the public sector, but obviously things that where data is available now around passive and active sensors. So this increases the number of applications for the use of sensors, drone navigation, connected vehicles, smart infrastructure, that kind of thing. So what's the Geospatial Commission doing? Well, we work in lockstep with the broader government data strategies, national data strategy, and the really great work that the CDDO are doing around standards, but also driving accelerated delivery and thinking and improved capability across the public sector. A couple of things that we're doing around population mobility data I've mentioned. We've been engaging across government to understand the requirements and make a benefits case for efficient use of mobility data. For Earth observation, we're building on an existing agreement that we have where we can access aerial photography data, and we're at the moment testing whether there's barriers to wider uptake of satellite data in the public sector, piloting use cases and technology and public sector capability, and importantly, what the market can deliver, because we're also very innovation and growth focused as a government strategy. And then we're also really focused on unlocking the policy barriers. So I've mentioned ethical use, ensuring the public sector requirements are clear for aggregated anonymized data. And we published a paper recently, the ABC of ethical use, to contribute to the wider debate about data ethics. Now, our angle is about spurring innovation and growth through greater policy certainty from government. And we're also surfacing the difficulty in making the data transformation investment case. So we've published a new framework as well that sets out some clear steps and things to consider to make the case for the public sector investments in data transformation. So I'm looking forward to getting into a more detailed discussion about the applications, barriers, and what we're doing about them.
Brilliant, thank you, Talia. I mean, really interesting to hear what you do, because I think maybe some people aren't as familiar with some of the things that you do, the projects that you're promoting it. And I think between you and others on the panel, we've covered so many policy areas there. So we had Sue talking about immigration, climate change, you talking about transport planning, land management, also impacts of kind of climate events as well. So really covering that full range of policy areas. But definitely what you say there, I think we'll get onto those in the questions, some of the barriers that still exist. So the investment, the understanding across other professions of how this type of data can be used. And then ethics, definitely a big issue, which I'm sure we will have questions about. And just to say, we've got some questions coming into the audience. So before we go to JF for our final presentation, please do start putting your questions in. And now, JF, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Great, thanks.
Right. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm grateful, and hopefully I could add a little bit of value. I think we're in the right space in terms of public sector in the UK. And if you listen to Sue, Data Challenge, I didn't know about that one, but I've done an hackathon with DWP. And when you do these kind of things, it's really data driven. And I think that's great. It's about solving problem, things about Iran, Ukraine, net zero, fraud, geospatial. So it's great to hear that. The value, recognize the value of data. The UK has a data strategy since December 2020. If I look at, you could do a search on the web, you could see a lot of department, most of the department have a strategy around digital data technology. So a lot of things are happening. Fiona, great about the inflation, getting the information very quickly. So Bank of England and all these people could work together and make data-driven decision, collaboration. And then Talia, Google Earth, transport planning, borders needs to be redesigned. I know we have a border strategy document as well. So I think it's all there. It's all great stuff. And we have quality people on this panel working for the government to make it happen. So things that from my perspective, where I think we could improve is to move a little bit. So we have a lot of people doing great stuff. I think now the organization, the public, every department needs to move into a culture of a data-driven culture, a data-driven decision-making culture. We're lucky I work at Google. I'm lucky I work at Google. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. So when I joined Google 3 years ago, I was very astonished that in a lot of our conversation internally, we always look at data to make decision or to talk about something. And if the data doesn't make sense, we stop conversation and how it's going to help our client or how it's going to help the society. And I think it's it's all the things as well as that when you have a challenge or you have you need to achieve a goal, it's the mindset of, like when I talk about data-driven culture, is about, let's say you have an hour to solve a challenge or make a decision, spend 55 minutes thinking about the challenge or problem and 5 minutes about the solution. But we tend to do the other way around. We jump onto solution without looking at all the data. And then we just talk about solution. And then sometimes we put in place or we make a decision that doesn't make sense. But the good news is that if you look during COVID, I found out it was amazing to see our Prime Minister and all his support team to make decision driven by data during COVID. You know, they had a chart, they were talking, okay, this is what we're gonna do, but looking at the trend of the data, we might open up this and restriction. So it was amazing. I'm not sure if it's the UK who started that or it was from the US, New York, but a lot of people are doing that. And it was kind of a breath of fresh air to see that. And now, you know, I don't want to be political, but if you look at the mini budget on Friday, the decisions that were made then, I don't judge, were they data driven or were they coming from a different angle? My view is that if they're data driven, when investor or people will ask questions, they're going to be able to justify the decision because of data. If we reduce the corporate tax, this is going to help the growth by this because we've seen it in different countries and based on our, you see, you know, so I think that's where we could improve and be better at. But, and then it's from the top to the bottom, everywhere in the organization, not only the data team or the data strategy team and people who are passionate about it. It needs to come from the top to the bottom. And that's what Google, we achieve or we do on a day-to-day basis. I think where we could help as well is thinking about open data architecture, open source architecture. I think that as well will bring a lot. Why Google? I think Google, we could help. I've just mentioned one or two things. As well, if you look at our mission, is to organize the world information and make it universally accessible and useful. And if you look at the government of the UK, you produce a lot of data, ONS, satellite, a lot of data are open now, and you make it available to people, to the citizen. And we do the same thing. That's what we do at Google. So I think we could, you could learn from us and we could learn from you. And then we're lucky to be in a position where we have 9 services that have more than 1 billion users. So we know scale, we know data, we know how to handle it, we know real-time data. You know, Alison mentioned Google Map. It takes the data of everyone at the same time. You know, it's real data, and then the system gives you your best estimated time. Look at the traffic and everything. YouTube is the same. Search is the same. We have Google Trend, so you could look. Sometime we know we did some AI study around flu season when it's going to happen because people search for symptoms. But Google Trend is available for everyone to look at your region, and it's all breakdown. So massive amount of data at Google, and I think we could help the UK government.
Thanks so much, JF. I mean, you mentioned there, I think some things that will resonate with the other panel members, but the need for a data-driven culture that goes through the whole organization. So top down, bottom up, that real shift to data-driven decision-making. I think that's something none of our panel members would disagree with. I'm going to come back on COVID in a minute, because I think that really was a shift in the way the public and policymakers thought about data and how data was used. And then I think one of the themes for all of these webinars is how we can learn from each other. So whether that's across government departments or across private and public sector, there's so much that we can gain from deeper collaboration and learning from each other. So thank you so much. That was a great way to end our presentations. Please do keep those questions coming in. But I do want to ask everybody, going back on what JF said there at the end. So I want to ask Talia, Sue and Alison, to what extent do you think COVID really did kind of create a shift, both in that public perception of the kind of benefits of using data, but also did you see within government more collaboration across departments and breaking down of some of those maybe traditional silos that used to be in place. Sue, you're nodding along to this. I'm going to come back to you on this one first.
Yes, definitely. So in the immediacy of COVID, I was involved in the Vulnerable People Service for those people who'd been told you're going to have to shield as part of this first lockdown. And of course, what do you do then? Those individuals need support in some way, whether it's food or medical support or other things that local authorities provide. And that was a real coming together of NHS, so NHS Digital, GDS as the kind of the service provider for the core, some other departments, DEFRA, DWP, DLUC, and local authorities, and actually then some private sector providers, some wholesalers, and we spun that service up in a matter of days, because there were a couple of things that came together. One, there was a shared sense of purpose. There was a shared understanding of the urgency of the situation, and a common desire, I think, to work through whatever issues around data sharing, around the building of the platform, around the reuse of the data. There was just that will to work it through, and also really strong support from the top, and strong oversight and governance. And I've seen that happen a little bit since, but I think that's kind of the blueprint for me of where we need to continue with government. And just on public attitudes, I think it's been something that's probably moved a bit over the years, but it still does feel to me that it, and I'll be interested in what others on the panel have got to say, that if you ask a really general question, you might get a stark answer of no, we don't want government doing that with our data. But the minute you start to get context specific with people around, it's for this use, for this purpose, and this will be the outcome, that's when you start to see a shift in views. And just a quick example of that is a new bit of legislation that we're helping to put through. It's going to be debated in Parliament early in October, I think, where it's providing early learning and childcare support for under twos in Scotland. And it exists already in England and Wales. So this is about parity. And we ran a public consultation back early in the summer. And we're really clear on the use case, on the data, which organisations were involved. And we got a 94% approval rating for that consultation. Yeah. So it kind of shows, as long as you're being transparent, and I think is what others have touched upon, you're being transparent about how and why you're using the data, you will get results and responses like that.
Thanks, Sue. Talia, you mentioned in your presentation, part of your role is to drive up kind of understanding and capability. Do you think COVID helped in that respect, in that there's more kind of willingness now to understand this more?
Yeah, I agree with what Sue's saying about if you've got a specific purpose, then it's easier to understand what kind of things you need to have in the one place. So capability, access to data, to then do that. And I think that obviously there was pretty targeted use cases. So from a location data perspective, we had, through the contract that we've got with Ordnance Survey, a few people in the dashboards team in what's now the Health Security Agency, and they said they were up in front of the PM from day one, really, just having a look at where people were coalescing to manage lockdown. But also Ordnance Survey did some work on the best locations for testing and vaccination. So where there is a common purpose, it's easy to come together. I'd say I also think, though, there's significant barriers in the public sector to accessing the right kind of data to do these things well. And those are long-standing barriers around, where legislation has set up an entity in a particular way. It's really hard to then make the case, but then find a legislative timetable to change that so it can be shared or accessed by other parties. I suppose on the public attitude is changing as well. We did some research through a public dialogue just to understand how people felt about use of location data and tested, who they trusted most. Parts of the public sector, NHS came out top actually through the pandemic, and private sector. And what we generally found though was people have confidence in location data use, not only for personal convenience, but if they can understand the broader public benefits as well. So I think there's a kind of articulation case for government and making clear exactly what it's using the data for. And that's one of the reasons I think we're quite keen on working with other bits of government to ensure that if we do more commonly used mobility data to support quite a lot of different things, we're saying the same things about why it's being used, we're being really clear about that, we're being clear on the basis for which it's being used, that it's aggregated and anonymized, it's not targeting or tracking individuals, that kind of thing. So from a policy perspective, that's what we're thinking about. But yes, I completely agree, the national coming together around how best to tackle COVID has really supported and driven acceptance of the use of data and real time in particular.
Thanks, Tanya. I'm going to move on to the question from Alan, which I'm going to put to all of you on the panel. But Alison and Jean-François, if you wanted to bring in anything from COVID as well, please do when you're answering this question. But I think it feeds on nicely. So Alan has said, with so much real-time data being available now, is there concern from members of the public of a kind of big brother is watching us? And how has the data security and storage of this data been agreed by Information Commissioner's Office? So I think this goes to the heart of what you were touching on there about trust and the need for transparency and the benefits as well. But so this sense of, do you think there's a growing concern as governments gather more data? Is that going to lead to more concerns from the public around a kind of big brother approach? Alison, I'm coming to you to start on this one.
I think COVID was super interesting, and UK government kind of became a celebrity overnight. They had a compelling event and a compelled audience. And I think what was really good about that time is it was very open and transparent, and the NHS had a role to play. The Office for National Statistics had a role to play. You could clearly see this information coming into central government to be informed on decisions and advice to the public. So, I think because it was so open and transparent, because it was anonymized, because it was depersonalized, I think people are more accepting of that is the way it's going to be. And as long as that is maintained and those ethic questions are always asked and that openness is maintained, I think it will remain, or the public will remain confident in the government using it correctly.
Thanks, Alison. JF, I'm going to come to you before I go back to Talia and Sue from the government perspective. But do you feel on this question of big brother and trust, do you feel sitting in the private sector that people maybe are willing to give you their data more quickly than they're willing to give the public sector their data?
I think it's the same at the end of the day. It's just a question of timing. I will say, I don't think it was easy at the beginning when Google started, but they built the trust. We're quite secure. We're one of the most targeted company in the world. People would love to see google.com search engine down, or YouTube or Google Map. And they would love as well to go into Gmail. So Gmail is the most used software for messaging. So we have 3 billion users active in the world. A lot of them are in China, activists in different countries. So people trying to hack our system. So we learn a lot from this. And so in terms of security, we brought everything to that into Google Cloud. It's premium. Just to give you an example, when the Chinese hacked our system, the funder at that time, instead of saying, oh, let's stop them, they create a team of 10 people. And for 3 weeks, we look at what they were doing, how they enter our system, what they were looking for. So we knew it was, everything I'm telling you is in a book, so it's public. I won't tell you the detail more that we learned, even me, I don't know. But we learned all of that, and now we built zero trust. Zero trust is a concept from Google, like Kubernetes, TensorFlow. We bring a lot of concept into open, and then we share with people and companies. So security is there. What I would say is that if the citizen see value in the services, is happy to provide consent, but you need to give him an easy way to opt out. So you tick, 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 that's it. You're not trustable. So I think we need to do the same with the public sector. Say to them, being transparent, open, this is why we're using this. It's going to help UK public sector. We're going to have less people with fraud. So less people will be sick, all these kind of, and people will say, okay, but give them as well a way of being able to opt out. And then it's their decision. A lot of people are not using our services, and some people might not decide to use some government services because they don't want to be in that kind, because they fear that big brother. It was the same with the vaccine, I think. So I think we need to provide choice. If you provide choice, it's okay, I think.
Thanks, JF. Talia, on this question of, do you think people are concerned about Big Brother? I mean, you did mention how, location data could be used to kind of track movements, people's movements. So is this a concern that, you are obviously addressing? And also, what reassurances do you think government needs to give the public that, one, their privacy is going to be protected, but also their data is going to be secure?
I suppose in theory, people have their own mobile phones, and they provide information back to companies about that, not the government so much at the moment, and so it's possible. But GDPR, I think, covers the privacy risks that people might feel. I mean, it forbids companies from identifying individuals. It's an interesting question about whether that's even possible in a geospatial data world, where if you link people's geographic locations over a number of points, 3 or 4 different locations they might travel within a particular time period to places they're going, then some people would say you can't make those people anonymous, but you definitely would be able to infer some things about their characteristics. But the government hasn't used and doesn't have any intention in using that kind of technology. So, the data that was provided by telcos for COVID was aggregated over a large number of people. And the use case was just to see how crowds were kind of coalescing in particular areas, for example, whether there were people, didn't matter who they were, but whether they were in places that they weren't supposed to be at particular hours of the day, and then government can kind of update its communications campaign, etc. So, and as I've said, I think people are just really comfortable with attaching the provision of their data if they know that they're getting something back for it, whether that's the government or the private sector. Strava was saying to us the other day that they run Strava Metro, which is a free data service that they update on a monthly basis that local authorities can use to see cycling journeys, and people can tick a box to say, yes, you can share my gender and age, and so local authorities can use that for urban planning, and people therefore must see the benefit in that. It's a big data set. So I think we're mindful of the public perception risks if government was to go down a particular track, but I don't think it's likely that government will go down that track. And there's, from a policy perspective, also capability perspective, which we haven't really talked about, but there is a big question about not individual data, but in general big data, the public sector's capability to bring that in very quickly to use these applications that it might be useful to touch on.
Yeah, thanks. So the more you learn about this, the more you realize the potential is just huge in kind of linking all these different sets that already exist. Sue, your thoughts on these concerns around kind of big brother? Is that a genuine concern? Is that a reasonable concern for people to have?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, and it's provoked a lot of kind of thought, hasn't it, so far? And for me, that is something that we always have to have in our minds, and why ethics and transparency is there as one of the key 5 pillars in the National Data Strategy, because we do have a responsibility I think people probably perceive that government has fairly or unfairly, has a greater responsibility around the ethical and responsible use of data than maybe other organisations, and certainly some of the events, shall we call them, in recent years that have attracted interest, maybe more so because they've been on a nationwide scale and because they've been government. And just to kind of pick up a little bit on JF's point around the giving people choice, it's kind of yes and no, because actually some of the services that government provides, that might be because of a particular responsibility that the government has, the responsibility of the state. But so I think we just need us to be a little bit kind of careful around that. But at the heart of the question, I think for me, is kind of not confusing the concept of real-time or other data with then the practices that we would apply to kind of using that responsibly, because regardless of whether it's real-time data, whether it's been data that, Fiona alluded to a number of surveys that they've conducted, that's kind of a one-off or at a time event, isn't it, that may be repeated, or maybe a one-off around why have over 50s decided during COVID that they were going to stop working and not go back post-pandemic. And actually the same safeguards need to apply, as Talia said. At the heart of it is GDPR and thinking about how we manage data effectively and responsibly, particularly if it's personal data. But beyond that also, I would reinforce what Talia said, maybe a little bit more strongly, in saying that when we talk about our desire to have data made available and reused across the system, real time and otherwise, we'll still have the appropriate checks and balances in there. It won't suddenly become a data free-for-all. And to make sure that we're kind of doing that effectively, we're developing, got a suite of products and frameworks already around ethical use of data, around how we're approaching data standards, codes of practice related to the Digital Economy Act, and we're continuing to expand those. And in a lot of our work, we do, as Alan asked in the question, have a lot of interaction with the Information Commissioner's Office. So they provide, in some cases, long-standing advice for us around the Digital Economy Act, for example, or maybe it's a little bit more ad hoc, where Vulnerable People Service, we had regular interactions to make sure that what we thought we were doing was responsible, was also in the eyes of the regulator responsible as well. So hopefully that has given some reassurance that absolutely we want to innovate with data, but at the heart of it is doing it responsibly and ethically.
Thanks, Sue. We've had another question in from Lynette Holmes, who has said, do you see a time, I think this is to everybody, do you see a time when data such as economic, employment statistics and apprenticeship data will be available and shared in real time, in more real time, so to get more granular by industry and regions? I have to admit, I'm not sure how real-time the data at the moment is that's shared on these kind of issues, but I think Lynette is asking, is it going to become even more real-time in that kind of policy area, so on economics, on the economy and employment? Does anybody want to kick off on this one? Alison, are you aware of any kind of use?
I could start if you want.
Kind of data, or JF? Yeah, JF, over to you.
I think the technology is there for real time. You need to find a reason why we want to do it. What's the political reason? What's the business goal and everything? Because having real time just to having the data and not using it, you consume storage, it's not good for the environment. So I would push back. But the technology is there. So for things like COVID, even COVID was not real time, because they said we're looking at the data, we're lagging a little bit, but it was enough to make a decision and be effective. So that's my point of view.
And I guess, JF, there is a risk, isn't there, that in kind of everybody's desire to get more and more data, we just gather so much data that actually we don't really focus on the data that's most kind of useful.
So I'll give you an example. We have real-time data with Google Maps. So when you go to a destination, you know all these red pattern and it gives you option. Perfect. So you even sometimes you don't need to. It's this is not the normal route, because you always know that this one is shorter. So that's real-time data. It has a use cases.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone want to come in on Lynette's question before we move on? I want another question on skills in a moment. Okay, so we're going to move on to a question about skills. I think all of you touched on the need to either increase capability across government for a kind of better use of data, but also better collaboration, I think, between kind of technical experts on data and generalist policymakers or people in other professions. So I guess my question is to all of you, to what extent do you think, either because you work in the public sector or you work with the public sector, to what extent do you think they have the skills necessary at the moment to kind of basically to be able to benefit fully from these new technologies, and to what extent are we going to have to grow some of those skills? Talia, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, things are definitely changing. So, you know, we know in the public sector that historically, you know, not even historically, just operates in silos, and that includes technical teams sitting in different bits of the same department, from policy teams trying to think about how to solve the same problems from a different angle. I think that's coming together more. It is a capability gap though, and I think, I don't know, Sue might be able to say something about the kind of the DDAP framework in particular. So the drive from the centre are trying to ensure there's a professionalised way of upskilling people and identification of particular kinds of gaps and roles, therefore, and the ability to kind of bring people in from the private sector, for example. Public sector pay is not comparable, so that's been really tricky, and plus the demand in the public and private sector is kind of rising exponentially, and so that's quite hard in that regard. But yeah, I think in general it's slowly improving, and the CDDO, for example, is at the heart of driving improvements in digital and data capability, but I think there's quite a long way to go. And you know, that does slow down the ability for us to think about how we bring together innovations and new technologies in the private sector with departments that could really benefit from deliver. You know, JF said that the technology is available, so we could do things, but what's the use case? I'm not even sure. I think that the public sector is aware that the technology is available in lots of cases, and also if it requires hosting for big data, then you've got a data transformation challenge on your hands, and how you start to tackle that is by making an investment case. So all of those barriers are linked together. It's really hard to disaggregate them.
Thanks, Talia. Sue, yeah, your thoughts on kind of skills that Talia mentioned there, the kind of recruitment, the difficulties in recruiting good people. This comes up in all of our webinars, and everybody always nods and goes, yes, it's really hard to recruit and retain professionals into the public. What's the solution to this? How do we do this?
Because I think part of the issue is that it isn't just a public sector problem, and it's not just a UK problem. You know, the way that we're talking about UK government seeing, particularly through the lens of COVID, the value and application of data. It's not just the UK government that's come to that kind of realization. It's everywhere else, and it's kind of, so some of it is about being able to compete with maybe what private sector organisations can offer, and you do find, we're finding that there are people who are interested because of the nature of the challenge that exists in the public sector, in government, that they, you know, like to come and work for a stint with us. We're starting to see that. Some of it is about visibility. So DDAT as a profession, and CDDO as an organisation, still fairly new compared to a lot of other. You know, you think of government professions and you were in the civil service, so you think HR, finance. Commercial is kind of, you know, again, an older one, but major projects, a new one. So there's something about that visibility of government offering a career or part of a career choice for people who are doing digital data and technology roles outside government. And so there is work underway to kind of develop that brand and do some outreach and make that case for the kinds of challenges that we have. And it is, you know, you are doing something for society by coming and working with government. But also, as Talia said, DDAT framework, you know, we've got a couple of data roles. We're trying to work up both breadth and then depth of the roles that we need, where I think over the last couple of years, it was originally, let's get data scientists on the framework and data engineers. And now we're seeing, as is in our case, data security, data privacy that is slightly different from data protection officers, data management, you know, lots of things that in some sectors, particularly like the financial sector, will be like, whew, they're a bit behind the curve. But these are all the roles that we need that we're working up. And then the other thing, and JF, I think you said it perfectly about approaching a problem and the 5 and the 95 being just the wrong way round. I think that's where we're also doing some work around general training and upskilling around understanding that you have to get comfortable in talking about the problem and about data in the context of that problem shaping before you reach for a solution.
Thanks, Sue. JF, I'm going to come to you. If you were, so Talia was saying there as well, that you know, you have to make the investment case. If you were advising then a kind of public sector organization from all of your experience in Google, what would you be saying where they need to invest? Would it be in people, skills, technology? Where is it that the investment is needed?
I think Sue's spot on. You know, the public sector has challenged to recruit people with data mindset. We have the problem with the private sector as well. Not everybody at Google has that mindset. And then if you go outside Google, I work with other very good corporation. It's even very, very lower. You know, it's the same level as public sector. So I think it's a mindset that it's an evolution. I would say 20 years ago, we were not good with mobile application. We were not good with word processing, email, but it's part of our job. And I think it's everyone. And the society needs to be more data focused because it's important to protect yourself as well in terms of security. Hey, that data doesn't make sense. I'm listening to that government. I will ask question, or what you read on the internet. It's becoming more and more important. So now people need to be data aware. And I think it needs to start at school. I don't know how to do it, but now at school, they use computers when they're 3, 4. So I think it needs to start there. So private sector and public sector, we have these challenges. We don't have enough. And what I would say is that if you look at I'm not saying it's ideal, but some organization coming from a different angle, from data solving a problem, Uber, Airbnb. And I think the counterpart of Uber, China, is Dixie, or I don't remember what's their counterpart. More than 55% of the people have a data background and their title. So HR needs to have data, logistic data, finance needs to be data driven in everything that they do. So I'm not saying that, but I could see 10, 20 years on that everybody will focus on data, from logistic to secretary, PA, the guy at reception, everyone will look at data and challenge and make it more effective.
Thanks, Jeff. I mean, that's a vision of the future. That's a big kind of transition from where we are.
We need to. It's like word processing. You know, we know how to use internet, but we didn't know before.
Yeah. Alison, I can't believe we are almost out of time. The discussion has gone really, really quickly, but I'm going to come to you. We started with you. I'm going to finish with you. Your thoughts on kind of skills, but then generally just your reflections on what we've heard in the discussion today as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think Raquel, there's a slide that you can pop up. There we go. So how can we help? and what we tend to find with most government organisations that we work with, we start at the top there. And it's not, to JF's point and everybody what we've discussed today, it's not about always proving the technology. It's known that the technology's there, but it can be working in collaboration. So we tend to work with the customer, with Google and CTS, following that those DDAP principles, or those playbook principles in rapid agile iterations to build a team. Google provide that vendor ratified design and also can help with that product specialisms and roadmap information. So, so they can inform the group of whether those technologies are going to be applicable later on. And CTS are able to bridge the gaps, again in DDAP playbook language, bridging the teams to fill the skills gaps that are there, that are sometimes but it's just a lack of confidence that means that the project can't continue or those outcomes can't get hit. So that's where we tend to operate, starting the Google inspired transformation. We can sometimes co-fund that depending on certain criteria, but yeah, pretty much commonly we get there, get to a point where a minimum viable product can be achieved. We tend to focus our activities on 3 core competencies. We do a lot with Google, but this is where we mostly operate. So those high velocity migrations, getting the information up into the cloud. The training and enablement piece often is a resell of Google training and certifications, but again, it can be with our own teams, with our own certified teams, bridging with yours to do that sort of knowledge transfer piece. Data and machine learning, which we've talked about today. Again, another core competence. We have a lot of data projects that are in flight at the moment. And then, of course, we have workspace, not necessarily applicable to the conversations today, but certainly around the subject of identity and security, that does feature. And that's an area that we get involved with quite heavily, particularly on that sort of data side as well. And then finally, we have managed services and continuous development teams that can help with that knowledge transfer piece. So, it helps governments give organisations more time to gear up and bring in the people that they need to bring. And I think to the last question, I think government, their greatest opportunity is through the graduate scheme and young people who are interested in social issues and public sector work, to be honest, who would be, the best bet. But that is going to take time, and that's going to take time to build. So in the meantime, collaborative partnerships that we're able to offer that can give that knowledge transfer piece towards the end is the way to go.
Thanks, Alison. I think the graduate scheme has been paused for this year. I might be wrong on that.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it is. Yeah. Bring it back.
It will come back. I'm sure that will come back. Well, yeah. That just leaves me an opportunity to say a huge thank you to everybody. I think what we've heard today is there are so many opportunities for officials to help improve policymaking, improve service delivery with this kind of new and innovative way of using data alongside those more traditional methods of using data as well, but not insignificant challenges and barriers to overcome in order to be able to do that, but a very positive look ahead if those challenges can be overcome. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel, to Sue, to Fiona, who had to leave early, to Talia, to Alison, and to JF for giving us all your expertise and your time. To the audience who are listening, there will be a questionnaire sent out to you. Please do take a couple of minutes to fill that in if you can. It means that we give you exactly the type of webinars that will be most useful for you. As you can see, we've got another one coming up October on the future of work. That's all about, I think, how the government can unlock public sector productivity, but we've got a whole host of webinars on our website. Please do check those out. I'm sure there will be other ones you will be interested in. We will be sending you all a link of today's conversations. You'll get that video. You can watch it all over again if you really enjoyed it. You can also share it with your colleagues. And there will be an article written with the key points from today's conversation that will be sent out to you in a week or so's time. Thank you so much for CTS and to JF for being our knowledge partners as well today. Wherever you are, enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope to see you very soon on another one of our webinars. Thanks very much to the panel. Goodbye, everybody, for now. Cheers. Bye-bye.